All right, well, hello. Welcome back to Renewed Minds Bible Study, Book of James. We are still in James chapter 2, and this is session 4. So I'm really glad that y'all are here. If you're watching on the Liberty live stream, hopefully you've got access to the notes. It should be published shortly after the live one happens. But hey, if you're watching live and you live local, you're really missing out because there's a lot of group discussion that has been very helpful. And I just want to let you guys know the direction we're going as we finish up James, just real quick. We're going to be going into 1st and 2nd Peter, but also as we get towards the end of James, I'm going to be sending out an email just with some of your feedback, different things that we're thinking about tweaking with the Bible studies, just to see what you think, things we can do better. But we're really enjoying it, and by we, I mean I am. I'm really enjoying it, so I hope y'all are enjoying a deeper dive into it. So anyway, let's go ahead and get started. Father, we give this time of studying your word to you. The way you spoke to James, may you speak to us through him and change us the same way that you changed him in the name of Jesus. Amen. Well, those of you who are here for the last session, it was pretty intense, wasn't it? I mean, we always talk about James being rough, but it's one of those that when I got done, I felt like there were several people looking at me like, why would you do that? Why would you make me look at this piece of my life? Well, the answer is because I had to do it too. And to be honest, I still am. Well, if that was intense, I just want you to know that James has just been building tension, and this is where it breaks wide open tonight. So far, he has challenged us to see trials differently, to live out our faith with action, to stop playing favorites, to treat people with mercy instead of judgment. But now he cuts to the core of it with one question, where he says, what good is it, dear brothers and sisters, if you say you have faith, but you don't show it by your actions? And those who study the Bible, they know that the book of James, it's really this back and forth of faith and works and how that all shakes out. So this is the kind of question that we're forced to look at tonight. Is it possible to believe in Jesus, talk about Jesus, feel something during worship at church, and still have a dead faith? And James would say yes. And so to help us really grasp the weight of this, I want you to imagine this. Let's say a person stands in front of their closet every single day and talks about how much they believe in exercise. And they post about fitness, and they wear gym clothes, and they nod along to motivational workout videos, but they never move. They never sweat, and they never stretch. This is what James is talking about when it comes to our faith. So my question is, would you call that person athletic? No, you would not. James is saying the same thing about our faith. He's trying to tell us that we can wear the language of faith, and we do, that we can hang around places where faith is discussed, and we are. You can agree with really powerful truths from the Bible. You can brand it, make a logo, post about it, check in at your church. You can do all of this, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. But if that same faith that you have that makes you post or wear a Christian t-shirt or say a Christian sentence, whatever that is, if that same faith doesn't make you move and do something to grow the kingdom, it may not be faith at all. And so just know in advance, this is the most theologically debated passage in the book of James, and for good reason, because at first glance, it looks like James is saying that you are saved by your works, not by your faith. But please remember that even Martin Luther called the book of James a book of straw because he believed so strongly in the grace of God that he thought that this book was negating it, and it is not at all. And we'll get to that tonight. What James is saying is that with dead religion, you'll feel like you're in the right, like you're in right standing, but you're not. Paul addresses how we're saved, and James is showing us how saved people live. So they're not in contradiction with each other. So in this session tonight, we're going to talk about the difference between dead faith and living faith, belief and obedience, which are totally different things, and talk and trust. We'll look at two people that James uses as examples from the Old Testament, Abraham and Rahab. If you already know who they are, they could not be more different. The question James is going to ask us over and over again is this: if someone looked at your life, would they see faith? Because we talk about faith being something that's invisible, but James would argue that is not the case. In this question, we're not looking at our words, our posts, our beliefs. We're looking at our decisions, our relationships, and our habits. So again, I would ask you, if somebody looks at your life, do they see your faith? Okay, let's go and jump into verse 14. James 2:14, I'm calling this, what good is it? You know why? Because that's what he says to begin with. What good is it, dear brothers and sisters, if you say you have faith, but you don't show it by your actions? He asks, can that kind of faith save anyone? Okay, so this is important for us to all know. James is not addressing unbelievers. He's writing to people who claim to have faith, who would probably affirm the right beliefs, show up in religious places, speak that language, say words like fellowship, being washed in the blood, all of this stuff that we talk about, and be fluent in it. But James asks a very simple question. What good is it if you say that you have faith, but your life doesn't show it? And that word say actually implies professing belief in something, but not demonstrating it. James is not condemning faith, obviously. He's actually just challenging faith that stays theoretical. Theoretical faith, I would argue, is not really faith at all. Have y'all noticed we've already filled in 2 of the blanks? You're welcome. All right. Because if what you believe never changes what you do, the question is it faith? See, belief has to do with facts. Faith has to do with what God will do with those facts. Now, the Greek word for faith here is pistis, which refers to more than a basic belief, like believing that this podium right here exists, the chair you're sitting in exists. It actually, when we talk about faith, the word that's being used here means trust, confidence, loyalty, commitment. And in biblical usage, when faith is mentioned, it is never a feeling or an opinion. And that's important because amongst our Christian language today, we'll say, my faith just felt so good, or it really built up my faith. Well, if that faith doesn't result in some sort of manifestation or actual action, James would argue against that feeling. That's why James asks, can that kind of faith save anyone? Not can faith save you? But can that kind of faith that has no follow through, can it actually save a person? He's trying to make us think about it. So I would challenge you, as we're talking about the faith that sometimes we keep silent, think about who it is that first shared the gospel with you. I mean, go in the Wayback Machine if you got to. Was it a parent, a teacher, a friend, mentor in the Marine Corps, whatever it was? Think about somebody who first shared their faith with you. Now, here's my question to you. Could you have been saved if their faith stayed internal? Their faith manifested in something that they did. They ended up witnessing, sharing the gospel, something like that. And before somebody says, well, if they didn't share it with me, God would have had the rocks cry out. He would have provided yeah, I get it. I'm not questioning God's abilities. I'm questioning our devotion to our part. So James is not questioning whether faith saves. He's questioning whether or not some people call something faith, but it's not really faith at all. Some people say they have faith, but it's really religious talk. Some people post one way on Facebook, and then when you run into them at Walmart, you avoid them because of how mean they are. Some people act one way on a Sunday morning and act completely different when they walk across the base. And so Jewish believers here, they're used to seeing faith through rituals and observance, and now they're finding that they have freedom from rituals and observance. But James pushes them deeper. He pushes them into their behavior, and he's asking, is your faith real enough that it moves you, changes you, costs you something? Because if not, what good is it? Why do you even have it? And so it's one thing to show up for religious things and let others lead or guide it, but what if what God is calling you to is a deeper participation in his kingdom? Think about how often faith today is reduced to just statements or vibes or identity labels. People will say things like, I believe in God, or God and I, we have an understanding. We've got a good deal. I don't know how you got on that level that you get to haggle and barter. I don't know how to do that. Or I'm a person of faith, or maybe one of the most used. I'm spiritual. Well, whether people claim it or not, they're all spiritual because we're a spirit at the core. But James is saying this, if you say it and you don't show it, it means nothing. So, personal insight for this first verse. First of all, and these are not things that we say out loud right now, is there any area of my life where I say I trust God, but my actions suggest otherwise? I'm not doing this to poke holes in your belief system or whatever. I'm trying to push us into a deeper relationship and a deeper commitment with him. And probably most of us could find something there. And the other thing is, if someone could only see my behavior, what would they assume I believe? If you really want to have fun and go down the rabbit hole there, you could probably apply that to more than just your faith. What would they assume that you're into, that you watch, how you talk, all of that stuff? All right, on to the next couple verses, 15 through 17. Faith that doesn't help doesn't save. Here's what it says. Suppose you see a brother or a sister who has no food or clothing, and you say, goodbye and have a good day. Stay warm and eat well. But then you don't give that person any food or clothing. What good does that do? So you see, faith by itself isn't enough. Unless it produces good deeds, it is dead and useless. This is a really good example. So listen, instead of like a theological illustration, James used something that was really painfully ordinary and common in that day. Imagine seeing somebody right in front of you who is obviously hungry, obviously needs some sort of ministry, is obviously cold, and you walk past them and say, hey, God bless you. I hope you have a good meal and you stay warm tonight. You would not feel good about yourself if you said that to them when you walk past them, which is why we act like we didn't see them and we don't make eye contact when we're at the intersections. That's just what people do. We don't want to do that because if we were to actually look at them and talk to them, the Spirit might tell us to do something. And then you walk away. Now, here's my question. If you watched somebody do that, if it's not you we're talking about, if you watch somebody walk up to somebody in need and say, hey, I hope that all your needs are met, have a great day, would you say, that's a compassionate person? James uses this example to say something blunt. I know, that's a shocker in this book. But he's saying this, if your faith can't even move you to meet someone's basic need, food, clothing, what exactly is it doing? And so the problem here is not a lack of theology, it's a lack of action. And James says that that kind of faith without movement is what is dead. Well, we talked about faith in the last verse, so the Greek word for dead here is nekra, literally meaning lifeless, without breath or inactive. It was a very descriptive word for something that's dead. And he's not saying weak. He's not saying weak faith. He's not saying non-existent, because some of us have struggled with our faith before, and that is not what James is getting at. Your faith is something you'll always struggle with in some form or some direction. He's saying this kind of faith isn't weak or injured, it's just already gone. And then the word for useless in verse 17 is arge, which means ineffective, idle, or unproductive. And this was used to describe land that was barren, or a servant who stood around doing nothing. James was basically saying, if your faith never produces anything, it is a barren field growing nothing. It's functionally empty. And this kind of example would have really hit the early church very hard because remember, we talked about this in every session, the believers that James is writing to, they've all been displaced. They've been scattered into a variety of regions. And they're outside of their homes due to persecution. Resources were really tight for them. Poverty was very common. And support from whatever the broader culture is, wherever they lived, was probably cut off because they were foreigners in a strange land. But also, support from their family was often cut off. And here's why. When somebody committed to following Jesus and the rest of the family wanted to be a traditional Jewish believer, they would cut them off because they believed they were leaving and entering into a cult. And so when James talks about seeing someone without food or clothing, it wasn't a distant possibility. It wasn't one day you're gonna see this and I hope you react the right way. He was saying, what do you do when you see them every day? And this is why this kind of faith distinction isn't as emphasized in the Old Testament. I wanna make this kind of clear because this kind of thing that we're hearing here, that it's through your actions that your faith is proven, in the Old Testament, we don't see it emphasized in the same way. And the reason is because under the Mosaic covenant, faith and works were so tightly woven together through the law that the community often couldn't distinguish between believing and doing. You were expected to be hospitable if somebody showed up at your door. You were expected to provide certain things. And as a matter of fact, you were expected to do it in front of other people. So if you saw people with needs, if you saw them being hungry, you were just expected to do it. And because it was such a culture and shame society, if you didn't do it, you would face public shame. So what he's actually getting at here is a little bit deeper. There are people in Jewish community that would have done it for the sake of communal approval, but would not have done it because their faith moved them to do it. And so he's challenging them. not even realizing that maybe the fact that they've been scattered already is to help spread the gospel. He's just trying to make sure they're an effective witness wherever they end up. So James, he just goes ahead and he draws a line in the sand, and he says this: real faith still produces fruit. Just because the sacrifices changed doesn't mean that obedience ever stopped mattering. So rather than being a contradiction of grace, this was a call back to gospel integrity. Because when I think about how busy life is today, it feels so familiar to me. Can you see the ways that this might manifest in our lives today? We don't have the communal honor-shame system in the same way, but I'll just give you a couple things that I often hear throughout Christian culture. But again, you can talk the talk sometimes and not have faith. How about this? I'll be praying for you. Have you ever said that and then you never prayed? I've done it. Not intentional. I've said it before and then had a thought 2 weeks later, oh, I never prayed for her. And here's the thing. Did my lack of a prayer tank their life? The answer is no. God is pretty sovereign, but I could have contributed to the betterment. I could have done what I was supposed to do. How about this? Let me know if you need anything, but we say it right as we're out the door, because we're kind of hoping that they won't. And again, this isn't every single person every time, but I've been there. I've been there where I've said it to somebody and I've been overwhelmed and I've been depleted and I've felt empty and I'm like, but please don't need anything. Or we just pat them on the shoulder and say, well, God will provide while we hold on to the resources that he's given us to share. James is not impressed by spiritual talk. He's just saying if your faith never touches someone else's reality, it has remained theoretical. So, personal insights. When was the last time your faith cost you something practical? And I give you some options there. When's the last time it cost you time, or it cost you money, or comfort, or convenience? And by the way, regardless of how you answer that, I'll just throw this out there, because some of us might say, look, just yesterday I responded to faith. Awesome. Keep it up. Because you're not going to be able to one day bank on all of your stories from 2025. Be like, well, 20 years ago, I did a lot of things for the Lord. I just kind of banked it up. I'm coasting. That's not the way that it works, right? And the other one is, have you ever offered words when God was asking you to offer help, when he was prompting you to actually offer them help? And when you feel that one, and my advice is just don't be a liar. Okay. James chapter 2, move on to verse 18. Okay, we're almost to the end of this part, but he says this. Now, someone may argue, some people have faith, others have good deeds. I'll pause there because, to be honest with you, faith is listed as a spiritual gift, right? So, I guess theologically you could make this argument, but it seems like a pretty bad argument to be like, you can't see my faith. I have a gift of faith. You can't see it. You should be able to, because it should move you, right? So he says, but I say, how can you show me your faith if you don't have good deeds? He says, I'll show you my faith by my good deeds. And then he doubles down on it. He says, you say you have faith, for you believe that there is one God. Good for you. Emphasis, not mine. And he says, even the demons believe this, and they tremble in terror. I'm really excited to talk about the demons in a minute, by the way. It's one of my favorite parts of this lesson, to be honest. He says, how foolish. Can't you see that faith without good deeds is useless? So James is now playing the role of something called a skeptic. Now, we use skeptic in today's language, but this is a common rhetorical technique in ancient Jewish writing. It's something called the diatribe. These are both words that we use almost in the right context today. But this is what he's doing as the skeptic here. He's raising a fictional argument that someone might have and then refute it decisively without any room left to argue. So before you get a chance to argue back, he says, and you might be thinking this, but here's why that doesn't work, which then forces you to think. It's almost like the sovereign spirit of the living God was guiding him as he was writing this to the scattered believers. And so in this scenario, the fictional person would say, well, some people have faith and others have works, and it's just different gifts, different callings, but James is not buying it because he responds with, how can you show me your faith if you don't have good deeds? In other words, and I think this is very crucial, genuine faith doesn't need to announce itself when it can already be seen. If you have to tell somebody you have faith, that's weird, right? Have you ever had the moment? I had it, several years ago, but I had a moment where I told somebody I was a believer and they said, "You're a Christian?" And I remember thinking, well, that's not the reaction that I should probably get when I say that. This is a long time ago, okay? People assume I'm a believer when they meet me now, so. But listen to this. James says the line that I personally think is more like a slap in the face than anything else in this chapter, where he says, "You believe that there's one God? Good for you, even demons believe that and they tremble." If it sounds sarcastic, it's because it's sarcastic, all right? James is using dry humor to score a really devastating point, arguing his case, that belief by itself is not faith, okay? Now, let me take you to a different scripture that's not in the notes, but many of you would be familiar with this. If you believe in your heart and confess with your mouth, would you call that an action? Of course you would. You could say, well, I've got this private, personal, I believe it in my heart. And James is saying, no, you don't, because you're not willing to say it. You're not willing to do anything about it. He's not asking everybody to go get crucified, but he's saying it's got to result in something. So the Greek word for believe here is pisteuo, which is to believe, to acknowledge as true, or to be persuaded. But James is saying that even demons do that, and they respond with more reverence than people do. How is that? Because they tremble. There are human beings, men and or women, that are made in the image of God, that believe God is real and show him no reverence. They have no fear of judgment over their actions, how they speak to people and of people, how they treat people. And so why is it that the demons would react better than we do? We'll get there. The Greek word for tremble is phryso. And this means like to shake, to bristle, like when the hair on your arm stands up from fear. So I'm going to give you an uncomfortable sentence. Are you ready for it? Demons have perfect theology. Theology means what? Knowledge of God. They believe in God. They know who Jesus is, but their belief does not produce any fruit. It produces fear. When they tremble, it produces fear, and they have a lot to fear from their position. And so it's not faith. It doesn't produce obedience in them. It just is belief. So James is asking, if demons believe and tremble, and you believe and do nothing, what makes you think that your quote unquote faith is even alive? He finishes with one of the strongest statements so far tonight. He says, can't you see that faith without good deeds is useless? So the Greek word for foolish is kenos. It means empty or hollow or without substance. Not mistaken, okay? Foolish doesn't mean you made a mistake, you misunderstood something. It means void of anything real. And again, I want to make this very clear because, man, you got a seat at the table here. We're all about helping you connect with the Lord no matter where you are in that journey. Just once again, James is not attacking people who are struggling with a belief or with their faith or whatever. He's confronting people who have made peace with having a lifeless version of faith that talks loud and acts small. So this conversation would have mattered a great deal in the early church because of Jewish identity and how it was evolving in the first century. A lot of believers still took pride in their monotheism, which is just belief in one God, because a lot of the pagans around did not believe in one God. They believed in many of them. And this is where this really manifests, because they'll quote Deuteronomy 6:4, and many of you would probably know this, but the Lord our God, the Lord, is one. That belief in specific, that God is one, is central to Jewish faith still to this day, and they believe it sets them apart from the surrounding pagan cultures. But according to James, believing God is one doesn't make you faithful, it just makes you informed. So what makes your faith alive isn't what you proclaim, but how you respond to who God is. We will keep talking about God shortly, but before we do that, here's what I wanted to just share with y'all when it comes to demons and their oh-so-perfect theology. James's sarcasm is even more powerful than it feels right now, and I'll tell you why. Because sometimes we use the word demon nowadays to represent a bad habit we struggle with. It's in pop songs. It's an entertaining, scary movie for some people, but first century Jews fully believed in the existence of demons, as I do. They are not metaphors. They are spiritual beings aligned with evil. They're in rebellion against God, and demons were simply known to be unclean spirits who could influence people, sometimes possess them, and cause destruction. And Jesus, if you read through the Gospels, he regularly cast out demons in the Gospels. And nobody questioned whether they were real demons or not. You remember when we were speaking about that perfect theology that demons have a few sentences ago? Mark 1:24. This is what a demon says to Jesus. "Why are you interfering with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." Who else was calling Jesus the Holy One of God at that point? They knew who Jesus was. They believed in his authority, and they still opposed him. So James's point is actually scathing, that if demons who are in active rebellion know the truth and can still be enemies of it, what makes us think that our intellectual agreement with belief is enough to keep us safe? That would have landed with a lot of serious weight for Jewish Christians, and it should with us tonight too. Demons are not cartoon villains. They are real, terrifying, and aware of God's power. So, if your faith looks more like theirs, acknowledging truth without surrendering to it, that's not faith. It's just fear masquerading as religion. See, they shake with fear, but they're not obedient. The big difference is, are you obedient to what you know of God? Because in our culture, it's easy to treat belief like a checkbox, to say things like I believe in God, or I'm on the right side of doctrine, or I vote the right way, or I agree with the Bible. And James says so does demons. Faith that doesn't move your hands, shape your speech, or change your character is just an echo of something real. So, personal insights. Where is my faith currently visible, and where is it hiding? And this one I actually had to struggle with when I was writing it. I had to take a break. Do I use belief statements to feel secure, even when my actions don't match them? Because in Christian culture, we can do it all the time. I can just give you a quick example. Hey, God is good? Yeah, but all the time. Man, how'd y'all know what I was gonna say? Because we grow up in it. We're around it for a while, and we learn the things to say. And because we learn the right things to say, we become comfortable in it, and it's really not so different than the Pharisees, except they were much more disciplined than we are. I'll just go ahead and move on to verse 21. James 2:21 through 24, this is how to be a friend of God. That's a good goal, don't you think? Don't you remember that our ancestor Abraham was shown to be right with God by his actions when he offered his son Isaac on the altar? You see, his faith and his actions worked together. And so his actions made his faith complete. And so it happened just as the scriptures say. Abraham believed God, and God counted him as righteous because of his faith. He was even called the friend of God. So you see, we're shown to be right with God by what we do, not by faith alone. And keep in mind, you're shown to be right with God by what you do. Doesn't mean that's what makes you right, but that's how it is shown. James is shifting from theological correction to like an illustration. And he knows that Jewish Christians deeply respect Abraham, the father of their faith. But instead of just referencing Abraham's belief, James takes them to the moment that Abraham's faith cost him everything. Many of you would know where this is going, but just by that statement, I'm just gonna get everybody caught up. In Genesis 22, God commands Abraham to offer up Isaac, the son of the promise that he had given to Abraham, the son that he waited literal decades for, the son through whom God said his descendants would come. And Abraham obeyed, as difficult as it was, because he trusted God. We've talked a lot about trusting God this year. James says that moment tested Abraham's faith, but it also revealed it. And I'm so glad that it did reveal his faith, because we benefit from that today. See, if he promised that through Isaac there was going to be children, Abraham may not have understood it, but he acted, knowing that God is not a liar. So the Greek phrase in verse 22, that his faith and actions work together, it uses the word synergeson. That's where we get our modern word synergy. It means to cooperate or to work hand in hand. In other words, like Living Water, Adopt a Child, and Liberty Church, we've got good synergy. We do great work for the gospel together. James is saying that the father of the faith, he's using Abraham as the father of the faith to paint a picture that faith and action are not competing forces. They're partners. They have synergy. Faith fuels obedience, and obedience fulfills the faith. So it's a beautiful cycle. He says his actions made his faith complete. So the Greek word for complete there is edeleothe. It means bringing something to its intended goal or the finish line. You ever started a puzzle and then it just sat there and collected dust for a couple months? Or maybe just a project or something like that? That's not this. Abraham's obedience didn't replace his faith. It finished it. It finished the project there. It proved that it had weight, and so to prove this, James ends up quoting Genesis 15:6, where it says, Abraham believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness. That was before Isaac's sacrifice, so the faith was real long before the test came. Now, the test, though, showed the depth of that faith, and in the same way, the sacrifice didn't earn righteousness, it only revealed the righteousness that had manifested there. James then drops what I believe is one of the highest compliments Scripture can give a human being. He says that Abraham was called the friend of God. Could you imagine that? I mean, how beautiful would that be if you did get an angelic visitation? Well, after you got yourself up off the floor, if they looked at you and they said, greetings, friend of the Most High, how amazing would that be? In Jewish thought, being a friend of God was not a casual thought. It implied closeness or alignment, like you have the same values together. In other words, they're not just saying, oh, God looks at you favorably. They're saying Abraham is so close to God that he has the same value system or close to it that God does. You see what I mean when I say this is such a high compliment? Because it's all about shared values and covenant trust. So to call someone God's friend was a statement of seeing relational intimacy and divine favor. That was covenant trust. This is because in the ancient world, friendship was always covenantal. Friends shared burdens, they stood in loyalty together, they gave generously of themselves, and that was the kind of life that Abraham lived, not just with a knucklehead like Lot, but also with God himself. And we can see that that made him a friend of God. Was it his theology? No, it was his willingness to be in surrender. That's what faith always looks like when it's real. Is willingness to surrender, is never being so proud to assume that you already understand everything. Okay, so this tension between Paul and James, I said we were going to get to this. It's something that we should address because even theologians have wondered throughout the years how to reconcile these two biblical authors. And to some at first glance, James seems to contradict what Paul says in Romans 4, 2-5, where Paul writes that Abraham was justified by faith, not works. But they're using the word justified in different ways. So I want to show this to you. Paul uses it to mean declared righteous before God. James uses it to mean demonstrated as righteous before people. If you have genuine faith inside of you, God doesn't need your actions to see it, he knows. But you know who doesn't know? This guy. You can say, oh, I've got a very good faith. It's very pure and God loves it. All right, so it's a weird resume to try and lay out before me, but I should be able to see it if you have faith, and you should be able to see it in my life. Paul is talking about how you're saved, but James is talking about what salvation looks like when it's real. So they're very close, but they're not the same thing. They're describing two sides of the same coin. One of my probably favorite quotes from an athlete, Mike Tyson famously said, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth, right? So you can say, I've got faith and I'll never falter and I'll never fail in it, but Peter said that too. Abraham didn't just trust God theoretically, he trusted him in a moment that would have torn most of us apart, and he acted on it. And the reason was because real faith always moves, it always costs us something, and it always brings our beliefs to completion through surrender. So, is there a spot in your life where God is asking for obedience and not just your agreement? That's one of the personal insights. You know, I've learned a lot about obedience. I've learned a lot about the benefits of being obedient to the Lord, and I still struggle with it because my flesh wants other things. I'll just throw it to you this way. What would it look like to walk in the kind of trust that Abraham had? I'll just also throw this out here, sort of on behalf of God. I highly doubt he's going to ask you the same thing he asked of Abraham. So I wouldn't get too worried about it. However, what would it look like to walk in the kind of trust where if God asked you to do something, you didn't have to wait for him to answer all the what ifs before you did it? Okay, last part of today. James chapter 2, verses 25 and 26. This is when faith takes a risk. Talked about Abraham, so here we go, verse 25. Rahab the prostitute is another example. She was shown to be right with God by her actions when she hid those messengers and sent them safely away by a different road. Just as the body is dead without breath, so also faith is dead without good works. So, after using Abraham, the revered patriarch of the Jewish faith, James immediately shifts to an opposite type of figure. Entering the discussion now is Rahab. She is, this is awful, are you ready? A woman. I know, but wait, it gets worse. She's a Gentile and a prostitute. I just wanted to make you have to write that in the fill in the blank. But here's what I'm getting at. The differences between Rahab and Abraham could not be more different. Male, female, Jew, Gentile, father of the faith, prostitute. The differences could not be more obvious, but the differences could not be more intentional. James is showing us that faith is not limited to your position or your background or your bloodline or your gender or your history. God always responds to faith wherever he finds it. I promise you that. James references a story in Joshua chapter 2. If you're going along the Liberty Church Bible reading plan, we read it not too long ago. This is where Rahab hides the Israelite spies that are sent to scout out the region of Jericho. When she does this, she risks her life and betrays her own city, all because she believed that the God of Israel was real and worthy of her allegiance. So how do we know that she believed? That's a real question. How do you know that Rahab believed? She acted on it. She did something, right? And this is what James is getting at. Abraham reacted to his faith with action, and so did Rahab. The Greek word for all of this, ready for, was shown to be right. It is the same word that was used earlier, which is dikaio, which means to be demonstrated or proven righteous. Same word that was used with Abraham. Her faith was active, it was risky, it was costly, and it was enough that she is listed in Hebrews chapter 11 in the Hall of Faith. How rich do you think her theology was? That deep in the Old Testament, Gentile, pagan city. I bet you it was more shallow than a kiddie pool. But her faith still moved. It still resulted in action. He says in Hebrews 11:31, we read this, "It was by faith that Rahab the prostitute was not destroyed, for she had given a friendly welcome to the spies." So, just in case you still think at this point that passive belief is okay, that would be wild, but James delivers the final blow now. He says, just as the body is dead without breath, so also faith is dead without good works. And the word for breath is pneuma. It can mean breath, wind, or spirit, but what he's trying to say is, just like a body without breath is a corpse, faith without action is a shell or a husk. I mean, I know there's a lot of beach fans around here, and I know it's wonderful to pick up those seashells, but do you ever just stop and think like, wow, something was alive in there? And okay. Like a body, someone's faith might have a name, might have a history, but no life. And Rahab's inclusion in this chapter, to us, we're like, wow, that's so cool. But it would have really shocked a lot of the Jews that James wrote to. Hebrews was not a book that they were reading at this point, okay? They knew about her role in the story, and they would just assume that God used this poor pagan woman to help get the people that have his favor into the city. It would have almost been offensive to some of them. She was not even Jewish. And if you continue to read, you'll see all of the rules that people have in order to convert to Judaism in the Old Testament. So these people that James is writing to, he's telling them she was moved by her faith and God saw it. She had no training in the Torah. She's just a girl. She was a woman with a stained reputation in a city that was marked for destruction, but she believed, and her belief moved her to action, and God responded to her actions that were motivated by her belief. And that's what James is highlighting. So this would have once again reminded James's readers that God does not operate by social hierarchy, even if we do. God always honors those who trust him. So trust is a huge place to go when somebody is investigating the Lord. A lot of times we try to battle and win their mind, and that's okay. I'm not saying it's not a worthy goal, but they can believe in him, but if they don't ever learn to trust him, you're giving them the theology of demons. He honors movement in our faith, and Rahab was justified according to Scripture in just the same way that Abraham was, not by who she was, but by what her faith led her to do. And so Rahab reminds us that faith isn't just religious background or a spiritual resume, it is about response. Will I follow God even when it costs me? Will I align with his purposes when it makes me stand out? Will I act on what I say I believe even when it's risky? So I want to challenge you a little bit on this one and hopefully help you pull yourself up here. Have I ever disqualified myself from living out my faith because of my past? The reason I want you to ask yourself that is because Rahab probably could have done the same thing. There's no way God will ever use me. If there's a real God for those Jewish people out there, he'll never use me. I don't even fit in amongst this pagan city that I belong to. And God said, oh yeah? How much do you believe? How can I live in such a way that I am remembered not for my background, but for my response to God? All right, so these are going to be the group discussion questions. James says faith without works is dead. In what ways have you seen people or yourself try to separate their belief from their actions? Number 2 is, which example challenged you more? Abraham's costly obedience or Rahab's risky courage, and why? Number 3, where in your life do you tend to talk about faith more than you live it? Please answer that with your table because I guarantee you you're not alone. Number 4, James says that even demons believe in God and tremble. So how does that statement challenge how we define real faith? Number 5, have you ever felt disqualified from living a life of faith because of your past? And how does Rahab's story speak to that? And the last one, what is one area of your life where